Okay, and now it is a huge honour, of course, to introduce Professor David Macdonald. There's lots I could say about David, but I will keep it to the professional stuff. He is a professor, the first professor of wildlife conservation here at Oxford University. He is the former director and the founder of the Wildlife Conservation Research Unit here, which he founded in 1986. All of his career, all of the unit has been based on understanding the science that underpins practical solutions to wildlife conservation issues and how we use that to tackle the most pressing conservation issues today. So his research has often been stimulated by conflict in various ways, whether that's between predation, infectious disease, invasive species. There's a huge wealth of knowledge and scientific expertise that I didn't have to cover this morning because David's going to review it now. So thanks, David. Looking forward to it.
Wow, how amazing. Can I just first check that in every crevice and far-flung corner of this huge space you can hear me if I talk like this? Somebody wave at me. Good. This place is called the Examination Schools for a good reason. The last time I was in this room was just over 51 years ago, taking the most terrifying exam of my life. I can tell you this is a hell of a lot more fun today. Very good. When, in 750 AD, Guru Rinpoche flew into Bhutan to deliver Tantric Buddhism, he rode on the back of a tiger. Later, in 1993, when 5,000 pastoralists were encircled by the designation of the Jigme Singwe Wangchuk National Park, they were therefore warmly disposed towards those tigers living there. However, their happiness, and you'll remember that Bhutan wisely measures itself by gross national happiness, their happiness began to fade when 2 years later the government banned them from killing wildlife and restricted their use of the forest. Now, using camera traps, Sonam Wang and I calculated that this park contained 8 tigers. Subsequently, my student Ugyen Penjor confirmed Bhutan as a globally important tiger refuge. Well, while the world, and I hope all of you, might rejoice, the 20% of farmers reporting that predators killed their stock were less happy. They lost 84% of their income to tigers and leopards. Half of them blamed the park for their hardships in life. Indeed, almost half of the tiger scats and 3/4 of the leopard scats did contain incriminating remains of livestock. However, farmers weren't blameless. 60% left their livestock unprotected at night. Now, this would seem to me pretty obviously to be human-wildlife conflict, but conflict rather like that famous Supreme Court ruling on obscenity, I know it when I see it, is rather easier to recognize than it is to define. Nonetheless, Alex's IUCN specialist group has had a go. So what we're talking about is human-wildlife conflicts are struggles that emerge when the presence or behavior of wildlife poses actual or perceived direct or recurring threats to human interests or needs, leading to disagreements between the groups of people and negative impacts on people and or wildlife. So, where people meet nature, especially where it's the sort of nature that's red in tooth and claw, and even when the people are so culturally and uncommonly well disposed to, in this case it was Bhutan's tigers, there is often conflict. Now, whether the issue is minutely obsessive, perhaps the fate of the last tadpole shrimps in Scotland, or as shockingly personal as the fate of our closest cousins, the solution will almost certainly require somebody modifying their behaviour, and perhaps everybody modifying their behaviour. In 1785, Scottish poet Robert Burns, ploughing his field, destroyed the nest of a wood mouse. Cradling the dispossessed mouse in his hands, he addressed it with the now famous words, "We sleekit curin timorous beastie," lamenting this human-wildlife conflict. I mention this because too often, it seems to me, academics speak of such conflict in the context of the most charismatic animals living alongside the poorest people. But even a contemporary British wood mouse would surely recognise her ancestors' conflict with agriculture, here as it happens embodied in chemical sprays. So my opening point is that the principles at stake today apply almost identically to tigers or to tiger moths. As it happens, I began with red foxes. And in the intervening 50 years, whether in the context of livestock or game or wildlife or sport or welfare or disease or most of all human values, prejudices and perceptions, I've never found any dimension of human-wildlife conflict anywhere in the world that wasn't illustrated by red foxes, nor any guiding principle more pervasive than the observation by Darwin's contemporary, philosopher Herbert Spencer, that opinion is ultimately determined by the feelings and not by the intellect. In India's Gir forest, people are famously tolerant of lions, but paradoxically, although 83% of people suffered depredation by lions and only 17% lost stock to leopards, 80% of people liked lions, whereas perversely only 28% liked leopards. It seems sort of unfair, doesn't it? In South Africa, jackals, perhaps beloved by some conservationists, are loathed by shepherds, where their diet can comprise 30 to 50% sheep, and where they might kill 100 lambs a year, costing a farmer $20,000 US. As for solutions, history provides, in this case, a wheel ripe for reinvention. Medieval livestock guarding dogs is depicted in this 14th century Italian Psalter. The dog guards the sheep, while one shepherd snoozes, and the others are distracted by the heavenly host. It was ever thus. Now, specialists among you will know which is which in this picture. Reared together from puppyhood, these dogs develop a touching protectiveness for their woolly companions. Protectiveness that may save the skins of the third of the world's remaining cheetahs that live in Namibia, where they can do this to calves, causing farmers to retaliate. One solution may not look very impressive at first, but give it time. Led by Laurie Marker, we imported Anatolian sheepdogs to Namibia. 73% of farmers reported a decline in the stock that they lost. Now, before dogs, almost no farmers believed that they were free of losses to cheetahs, and 69% of people reckoned they lost more than 10 head of stock to predators, whereas after dogs, on this graph, rather pleasing Oxford blue, is associated with a general sense of well-being, as 74% of farmers recorded no loss at all to cheetahs. And that partly explains why the number of cheetahs killed plummeted. In South Africa, predators are estimated to cost somewhere in the broad range of between 20 and over 100 million US dollars of damage a year. Farmers kill leopards, along with jackals and caracal, and a non-target bycatch. Janine McManus led us, therefore, in a before and after comparison, comparing a year of lethal control followed by 2 years of non-lethal control using guard dogs and guard alpacas and protective collars. Losses to both livestock and money were, by the second year of the trial, cut radically. Non-lethal control was 74% cheaper per head of stock, but while money talks, so too does culture, often with a very loud voice. So it won't surprise you to know that the little boy in this picture grew almost inevitably into a leopard hunting farmer. I'd like to illustrate the spectrum of conflicts that we've worked on by introducing projects from, for example, giant otters and gold mining in Peru, or badgers and bovine tuberculosis in the UK. But there's simply no time for that, so instead I'm going to focus for the next 10 minutes or so on a case study of the sort of thing. I was rather hoping for a picture at this point. There we are. This is the sort of moment that speakers generally do not look forward to. Perhaps the projectionists could perform some magic? Oh, there we are. Well, we missed the picture that I was rather hoping for, but never mind. It was a picture that Amy took of a whole load of dead and bloated goats, which, if you were the owner of the goats, would cause you despair. And this is the sort of thing that manifests as distress. And it leads to retaliation, a slide that Amy also took and showed you earlier. My case study right now will drive home the general point that every instance of human-wildlife control requires transdisciplinary evidence to underpin holistic solutions. I emphasize too that evidence alone is not the end point. It must inform judgment, and good judgment necessitates wisdom. My example concerns the lions of Khaza, which measures just over 500,000 square kilometers and encompasses 36 national parks and a whole host of other land uses. The dark grey blob is our 30,000 kilometre square study area, where since 1999, Andy Loveridge and I have dissected human-wildlife conflict against a dismaying continental backcloth on which contemporary lions occupy now only about 12% of their historic range, where since the 1960s, 63% of the connected habitat has been lost. The arrows show habitat connections that survive, the circles, the frailest of them that are in jeopardy. Rome is burning, but we have not fiddled, as our cover stories reveal that while these little chaps may look to you as if butter wouldn't melt in their mouths, the problem is that cows surely do. Documenting 117 lions killed in conflict over some 13 years around Huanghe National Park, the risk to lions was strongly predicted by cattle density and distance to villages, enabling us to anticipate, and I'm anticipating the next slide now. Yes, there we are. High-risk areas for lion deaths and separately for livestock depredation. Being close to people is always risky, but much more so in community lands, and least so, in this case, on hunting concessions. The upshot of people killing lions, whether in conflict or for trophies, was that prides at the park's core were twice the size of those at its edge, where only 42% survived intact for just 2 years, and only 48% of their cubs survived to their first birthday. The reality involved over 1,000 stock killed by lions, affecting some 14% of households at an annual dollar cost of just under 50,000 US. Furthermore, tragically, 1 child was killed. If this was your backyard, you wouldn't like it. So, we studied cows and found that they're herded closer to the protected area and thus closer to lions in the wet season, because that's when the farmers are pushing them away from their newly planted crops. And most cattle are killed outside protective bomas, and most of those are killed at night when they really should have been locked up. Oh, and by the way, the herders fit the cows with bells, which both lions and hyenas find really helpful in finding them. Having collared the stock-raiding lions, we worked with village chiefs to recruit so-called long shields, whose role was broadcast on posters throughout the neighbourhood under the direction of our gentle giant Lovemore, equipped with a mountain bike, cell phone and GPS, so that as the satellite alerts us that a lion has left the park, HQ phones the nearest long shield, who jumps on his bicycle and uses his GPS to go to the location, help the farmers round up their livestock, and then uses his vuvuzela to chase the lions back to the park. Next, farmers who had previously herded just a handful of cows each are guided on forming labour-saving cooperatives, and they're provided with easily erected, portable, lion-proof bomas within which up to 100 cows can be gathered at night, wherein, and this is the key bit, they dung copiously. Wild crews appropriately named Leo, who's somewhere in the audience today, then compares the maize crop grown on the boma-treated and untreated soil to reveal that we deliver more and bigger maize cobs to the farmer. Having protected the cows and improved the human food security, led then by Lisan Petrarca, we asked whether chasing the lions had really taught them a lesson. Now, Lion A, you can see him up there, in green, his movements are really ideal. Before training, he visited the park. He visited the villages beyond the park. But afterwards, he never crossed the park border. Males, but not females, got the message. Having been treated, they increased by 20% the proportion of protected area within their ranges. Is. But exactly when does our chasing protect the lions? We put this question to 15 GPS-collared lions. Chasing was less successful the further the lions were already from the park boundary, and the more lions were involved. This is the well-known problem of herding cats. And the less stable the pride membership and the wetter the season. Of course, it would be adolescents, they're the dotted lines, that are the worst offenders. And reoffending was worst amongst those punished the most. The reoffending was the least amongst those punished the most. We got a better result, that is to say. Habitual reoffenders are hardest to reform. Repeat offenders killed on average 29 head of livestock over the study period. The worst offending lion killed 56 head of livestock. Of 3 non-repeat offenders, 2 had been chased following their very first infraction, so that we caught them early. We think our lion training program has been a success, but even so, 318 livestock were killed in the 3 years of this particular study. And so if this was your backyard, you might have hoped for more from us. But remember, our Coexistence quiver has many arrows. Every school in the district receives a comic book on our work in Ndebele and in English, and our own theatre group has now performed our advice and data to more than 6,000 village children. And turning from carrot to stick, we run our own anti-poaching team, pictured here with just 1 month's haul of cut snares. So much for the detail. How can lions be integrated with people at a landscape scale? We use our lion case histories to extrapolate to landscapes and transboundary scales, and we ask, when do they disperse? How do they disperse? How do they disperse? How do they disperse? Where can they disperse? And therefore, where does the problem of human-wildlife conflicts lurk to await them? Take, for example, the green guy. There we are. He's a lion called Noka, who set out from the Okavango Delta and braved countless farms like that, following this fence line to arrive 400 kilometers later at the central Kalahari, only to find that it was full of lions, none of whom was particularly welcoming. Whereupon he turned back and sadly, halfway home, was killed at a cattle post. Now, from data like these, we modelled lion refuges and, aided by our landscape wizard, Sam Cushman, we ranked the priority Kasa lion habitats. And then we ranked the corridors that linked them in terms of importance. And we used those 2 things to predict hotspots for conflict, so as we knew where to intervene. Which brings us back to the human dimension. And Hwangi, where Lovemore Sibanda, somewhere in the audience, who's asked people what they thought. We've chased lions off on 75 occasions, and we've sent more than 1,200 text messages warning farmers of approaching lions. Farmers' attitudes to lions have become more positive in all 3 of the communities where we've surveyed them. People nowadays kill fewer lions, and lions kill fewer livestock. Kim Jacobson, also with us today, led our estimation that nowadays lions cost the average household $3.50 each per month in hard cash. But what of intangible costs, such as fear or stress or opportunities lost? Kim's valuations put each farmer's perceived cost per lion at $180 US per year per person. Using happiness economics, we then estimate people's subjective well-being. The sadness of losing a cow to lions persists for about 3 years and converts, in terms of happiness lost, to a loss of about $230 US of income per year. Are these insights from Ndebele farmers in northeast Zimbabwe, are they generalizable? Remember, Africa is a continent, it's not a country, and even the 24 lion range states encompass myriad cultures. Guy Weston compared the Zimbabwean attitudes to lions with those to livestock owners in Ruaha, Tanzania, and elsewhere. Around Hwangi, the people would like fewer lions. Those in Kenya's Maasailand would like more. Broadening further, Laura Perry used psychological models like the theory of planned behavior and data collected on smartphones and collated on the cloud to reveal how social norms can predict livestock management. Now, in short, what that means is if your friends and neighbors take good care of their cows, you're likely to do the same, and sadly, vice versa. Laura found that in Kenya's Chulu Hills, both norms, that's what other people do, and social reference, those are the people who do it, impact people's planned livestock management. Older reference had greater influence, whether for good, which is green, or bad, which is red, on younger people especially. To explore differences of opinion about amongst different constituencies, Ewan Macdonald led us in presenting images of 100 terrestrial mammal morphologies to 1,500 computer-owning participants from 5 English-speaking countries. And then Ewan and Lovemore put identical questions to the farmers bordering Hwangi National Park. Each participant expressed their preferences within 25 pairs of mammal. And you might like to guess the winner. Internationally, felids swept the board. The farmers had a rather different perspective. When considering a backyard, it's important to remember just whose backyard it is. The lessons from lions inform my personal general perspective on human-wildlife conflict. The Conservation Quartet involves research to understand the problem, education to explain it, community involvement to ensure participation, and implementation of solutions. On the road to sustainability, there's a linked and iterative process flowing from the problem to the solution. I was rather hoping the word solution would appear. There we are. Okay, imagine a species in conflict. Problems can be partitioned between the reducible and the irreducible elements. And the balance between these will shift as currently intractable problems are rendered reducible by innovation, itself engendered by the sort of research that many of you attempt to do. Mitigating reducible problems minimizes current conflict, and the residue is the currently irreducible, stubborn problem. Depending on levels of tolerance, themselves heavily influenced by education, catching up. The problem will have reached a point that is either bearable or unbearable for the community concerned. The character of the necessary interventions, and thus the interim solution, will depend on this unbearable component. Options are either to control, which is often a euphemism for kill, but not necessarily, the problematic creature, or to compensate the aggrieved stakeholder. That's my general view of these things. Now, a group of us, led by John Vucetich, suggest that there's a sweet spot which lies at the intersection of sustainability and conservation and social justice, which demands the fair treatment of others. But which others? 3 views are, I think, possible. One is misanthropy, which I simply dismiss. Another is pure anthropocentrism, treating other species as banker's chips in a utilitarian profit and loss account. Or, like me, some of you might be what I would call non-anthropocentrists, arguing that both humans and at least some other species have intrinsic value. Now, ethicists amongst you will recognize the application of the so-called golden rule and the Rawlsian veil of ignorance that led us to a principle that I think might interest you. It is that no human should infringe on the well-being of others any more than is necessary for a healthy and meaningful life, a proposition that has the virtues of being unequivocally non-anthropocentric, and yet it prioritizes human well-being. So, before too much talk of profit and loss beguiles us, remember that there are aspects of value that can't be monetized. As you tackle the huge issues of this conference, remember two ends of what I think of as a continuum. The earthiness of animal lives, human livelihoods, and practical action, and the erudition of big ideas from groundedness to geopolitics, a continuum in which you must bridge the extremes of values, of biologies, and of cultures. And so I close with Robbie Burns's lament to that wood mouse. He wrote, "I'm truly sorry man's dominion has broken nature's social union." Well, me too. And I hope your deliberations in the coming days will help us repair it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. You can see why I didn't try and cover all of that. I speak quickly, but that was a Herculean task. Okay, I'm going to get Johnny and John back up here with David while they're coming back up. We'll probably have time just for one or two questions coming up, but does anyone have any pressing questions for David first after all of that? You may well have stunned them into silence.
That's the idea.
I know. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, David, for the presentation. You probably have a unique perspective in how much the wildlife community has evolved over the time. How do you think that we are doing and how quickly do you think that we can integrate this into the conservation as a main?
Yeah.
Okay, so a big question on scaling up and how quickly we can do it. In the meantime, John and Johnny, do you want to come up and grab seats up here?
I can answer it quite quickly because I think the evidence of this room and the triumph of Alex and others to get us all together and the interdisciplinarity that it
suffuses every part of the audience shows you that in just a few decades the way that all of us think about these things has changed, much as Amy said about her own personal journey. So actually, in terms of a journey from silos through to holism, to integration, I think it's remarkable how quickly it's gone, and I think you are doing well. Okay.
Great. That is awesome. Thanks so much, David, again, and thank you to everyone. I think it's been a really inspiring panel. I certainly learnt a huge amount.